Have you ever wondered how a single, quiet voice, one that no one pays attention to, could change the destiny of a millionaire? What if the most important decision of someone's life didn't come from polished lawyers or high-paid advisors, but from a woman most people barely noticed? This is the story of how one whisper, spoken at the right time, stunned an entire room and altered everything. Every skyscraper tells two stories, one about those who sit in corner offices and another about those who polish the floors beneath their feet. In the towering headquarters of Grant Enterprises, marble gleamed under spotless lights, glass windows reflected the skyline, and leather chairs gave off the scent of wealth. But for Rosa Alvarez, the shine was never hers. She was the one who made it possible. Rosa was in her late 40s, her hands roughened by years of scrubbing, her back bent from long hours of mopping and lifting. She was a widow, raising two children who depended on her completely. Their father had died in an accident years ago, and since then Rosa had learned to carry the weight of survival silently. Every morning before sunrise, she slipped into her faded uniform, tied her dark hair into a bun, and walked into the glass tower where people like her were invisible. The executives hardly noticed her. They spoke over her head, brushed past her, and sometimes left coffee stains on expensive tables without apology, knowing she would clean them. Others tossed papers in bins without ever meeting her eyes. Rosa never complained. She took pride in her work because her children's school fees and food came from those unseen hours. But while invisible, she was not deaf. Rosa had an ear for tones, pauses, and intentions. Years of hardship had sharpened her instincts, and she trusted them more than contracts or promises. She knew when someone was lying. She knew when greed was hiding behind charm. The man whose name shone across the skyscraper, Alexander Grant, was the opposite of invisible. A self-made millionaire in his 50s, he was respected for his intelligence and feared for his discipline. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, his very presence commanded silence. Some whispered that he was ruthless. Others spoke of his rare acts of generosity, but no one doubted his power. On a brisk Thursday morning, Rosa was polishing the glass doors of the executive conference room when she overheard something that made her pause. Two men in expensive suits sat across from Mr. Grant, their voices smooth and confident. Words like unprecedented growth, guaranteed returns, and seamless partnership floated through the air. Rosa's rag froze mid-wipe. She didn't understand every technical term, but she caught the rhythm, the slick persuasion, the practiced charm, the urgency that didn't sound honest. She had heard that tone before, from the landlord who once tricked her into a lease with hidden fees, from the loan officer who promised low payments but nearly drowned her. It was the same voice of deception, only dressed in suits and polished smiles. Later that day, the meeting was set to finalize the deal. Rosa returned to the conference room with her card, tasked with tidying up before the big signing. She tried to move quietly, fading into the background as always. But her heart raced as her eyes flicked to the stack of contracts on the polished table. The room filled with advisors, assistants, and finally, Alexander Grant himself. He sat at the head of the table, posture firm, expression unreadable. The two men slid the papers toward him with thinly veiled eagerness. His lawyers murmured reassurances. Everything seemed ready. Rosa lingered, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted a bin. She shouldn't have been listening. She shouldn't have cared. But the instinct in her chest grew louder with every second. She saw the pen in his hand, hovering over the page, and a knot twisted in her stomach. She knew she had no authority here. She was just a cleaning lady, a woman who scrubbed other people's floors. Yet the thought of walking away, of staying silent while he signed something dangerous, was unbearable. And then courage surged, fragile but unstoppable. Rosa stepped a little closer, bent as though arranging her supplies, and let out a whisper so soft it barely reached the air. "Don't sign this." The pen froze. A hush fell over the room. Advisors exchanged bewildered looks. The two men stiffened, their confident smiles flickering. Alexander Grant turned his head slowly, his steel-blue eyes locking on Rosa. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as part of the background, but as a person. The silence stretched until Rosa's knees nearly gave way. She wished she could take the words back, wished she could vanish through the floor. But it was too late. Then, with deliberate calm, the millionaire set down his pen. His voice, low and commanding, cut through the tension. Why? Asterisk asterisk. And in that moment, the future of everyone in the room shifted, hanging on the answer of a woman no one had ever thought mattered. The air in the conference room was thick with disbelief. No one moved. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Rosa stood frozen beside her cart, her rag clutched tightly in her hand, as though it could protect her from the weight of what she had just done. Alexander Grant leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. Around him, his advisors shuffled papers uncomfortably, one of them clearing his throat as if to laugh it off. But there was no humor in Grant's expression. "Why shouldn't I sign this?" he repeated, his tone neither angry nor kind, only sharp with curiosity. Rosa felt her throat close. She had never spoken directly to him before. He was a figure of power, unreachable, living in a world far above her own. Yet here he was, demanding an answer. Her lips trembled, but she forced herself to speak. I don't know the words in those papers," she admitted, her accent thick, her voice barely audible. "But I know how they speak. Those men, they don't want to help you. They want to take from you." The two suited men at the table stiffened, their polite masks cracking. One leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "Mr. Grant, are we really going to let the janitorial staff comment on multi-million-dollar agreements?" A ripple of nervous chuckles followed, but Grant silenced them with a glance. His gaze returned to Rosa, and something unusual flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe even respect. "You hear dishonesty in their tone?" he asked. Rosa nodded quickly, her fingers twisting the rag until her knuckles whitened. "Yes, sir. I've heard voices like that before. They sound kind, but behind it is hunger. They want to swallow everything." Her words were simple, unpolished, but they carried a raw truth that no one else in the room dared to express. Grant sat in silence for a long moment. He tapped the contract with the edge of his pen, then looked at his lawyers. "Have you gone through every clause?" The lead attorney cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the major points, but the finer details are extensive. There are performance clauses, royalty rights, subsidiary ownerships, nothing out of the ordinary for a deal of this scale." Grant's eyes narrowed. He pushed the papers back across the table. "Highlight every clause that transfers ownership. Now." The attorney scrambled, flipping through page after page. Minutes stretched into silence broken only by the shuffle of paper. And then, one by one, they began to pale. Hidden deep within the dense text, the two men had slipped in terms that would eventually shift controlling power of Grant Enterprises into their hands. Grant's jaw tightened. He turned slowly toward them. "You thought you could bury this under legal jargon?" One of the men tried to recover, his smile stretched thin. "It's standard practice, Mr. Grant. Nothing deceptive." "Enough!" Grant cut him off, his voice like steel. The room fell silent again, the weight of authority pressing down on everyone present. Rosa's heart hammered in her chest. She hadn't understood the legal trap, but her instincts had been right. She lowered her eyes, afraid of what would follow. And then, unexpectedly, she heard his voice again, directed not at the men, not at the lawyers, but at her. "What's your name?" She looked up, startled. "Rosa? Rosa Alvarez." "Rosa," he repeated, as though testing the sound. "You've just saved me from a costly mistake." Gasps rippled through the room. The men in suits shifted uncomfortably, their confidence gone. One of them tried to speak again, but Grant raised a hand, silencing him. "Get out," he ordered coldly. They hesitated only a second before gathering their papers and storming from the room, their polished shoes clicking furiously against the marble floor. When the doors shut, the atmosphere changed. The advisors looked uneasy, whispering among themselves. The lawyers avoided Rosa's eyes, perhaps embarrassed that they had nearly missed the trap. Rosa stood rigid, unsure whether to leave or apologize. She had never wanted attention, only to do her work quietly. Now every gaze seemed to burn into her skin. Grant rose from his chair and walked toward her. He was tall, his presence overwhelming, and she instinctively took a step back. But his expression was not one of anger. There was something softer, though guarded, in the way he regarded her. "You listen when others did not," he said. That took courage. Rosa shook her head quickly. "No, sir, it wasn't courage. I couldn't stay silent." "Most people do," he replied. For a moment, the room seemed smaller, quieter, as though it contained only the two of them. Rosa felt her cheeks flush. She had no place here, no right to stand before him as anything more than a cleaner. Yet something in his gaze told her he did not see her as invisible anymore. Finally, he straightened, his authority returning like a cloak. He turned to his advisors. Meeting adjourned. We'll revisit the deal with fresh eyes. One by one, the others filed out until only Rosa remained, awkwardly gripping her rag. She expected to be dismissed, but instead, Grant spoke again. Rosa, he said, his tone softer now. From today, you're not just a cleaning lady in this building. You've proven you have something most of these people lack: instinct, honesty, and the courage to speak. Her breath caught. She didn't understand what he meant, not fully. But deep inside, a small spark lit in her chest, one she hadn't felt in years. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. After the meeting, the office felt different. Rosa returned to her usual rounds, pushing her cart quietly down the polished hallways, but she noticed something had shifted. Heads that had never turned to her now glanced briefly in her direction. Some offered faint nods. A few even smiled. It was subtle, but it was there. She tried to ignore it. Work was work, and she had responsibilities waiting at home: laundry, dinner for her children, homework supervision. Yet the memory of Alexander Grant's eyes lingered in her mind. There had been curiosity there, yes, but also respect, something she had never expected. Word of what happened that morning spread quickly through the office. Not officially, of course. In corporate culture, these things rarely make the press. But whispers traveled from one assistant to another, from one intern to another. Everyone knew that the millionaire had stopped mid-signature because of a cleaning lady's warning. It was unbelievable, yet true. Rosa felt a mixture of embarrassment and pride. She had never sought recognition. She simply acted on what her instincts told her. And yet, she realized, for the first time, that sometimes a single act, small as it seemed, could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined. Meanwhile, Alexander Grant sat in his office, reviewing the flagged clauses once again. He was meticulous, analytical, and unshakably disciplined. But there was something different in his demeanor now. He kept thinking about Rosa, the quiet woman who had dared to speak. Her presence lingered in his mind, not just as a memory of courage, but as a symbol of clarity that transcended rank and wealth. The next day, he called for a private meeting. Rosa was surprised when a secretary handed her a small note. Mr. Grant requests your presence in his office. Her heart pounded, but she went, expecting perhaps a reprimand or a warning about overstepping boundaries. She had never been summoned to his office before. When she entered, Alexander Grant was standing by the window, looking out over the city skyline. He turned and gestured toward a chair. Please sit, he said. His tone was steady, yet there was an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite identify. Curiosity, perhaps even admiration. You saved me from making a terrible mistake, he began. I should have been able to spot it myself, but your intervention was timely and precise. I want you to understand how significant this was. Rosa shook her head, murmuring, I don't know about significance, sir. I couldn't stay quiet. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. That's exactly it. You didn't care about protocol, rank, or fear of being ignored. You spoke because you recognized danger where others saw nothing. For a moment, Rosa felt exposed. She had spent years in the background, unnoticed, unheard, invisible. And yet, here she was, receiving praise not for compliance, but for courage. Rosa, he continued, I want to make sure your voice is not ignored again. He handed her a card. I'm offering you a chance to be part of our ethics and compliance team. You'll review proposals, contracts, and reports before they reach me. Essentially, you'll act as my advisor on matters where instinct and integrity matter more than paperwork alone. Rosa's eyes widened. The offer was astonishing. She had never considered herself worthy of such responsibility. Her life had been about cleaning floors, making ends meet, and protecting her children. And now this. I don't know what to say, she stammered. Say yes, he said with a small smile. Or at least think about it. But understand this. I don't want just legal expertise in this room. I want honesty, courage, and the ability to see what others overlook. That's exactly what you demonstrated yesterday. Over the next few weeks, Rosa began learning the language of contracts, the intricacies of corporate negotiation, and the subtle signs of deception that often went unnoticed. She discovered that her instincts, honed by life's struggles, were valuable in ways she had never imagined. Colleagues who had once ignored her now sought her opinion quietly. Executives paused when she entered the room. She still pushed her cart, still tidied offices, but she carried herself differently now, aware that her voice mattered, that her judgment had weight. Through it all, Rosa remained humble. She did not let the recognition swell her pride. Instead, she focused on helping others avoid mistakes, ensuring that the values of integrity and honesty were upheld in every corner of the company. And Alexander Grant? He watched her quietly, often from across the office. He saw how her presence altered the atmosphere, how her insight shaped decisions, and he realized that sometimes the most profound wisdom came from the most unexpected sources. The story of Rosa Alvarez spread quietly at first, then more broadly. Not through press releases, not through grand announcements, but through the ripple of respect she earned. People began to see that intelligence and bravery were not confined to titles, suits, or corner offices. They could come from anywhere, even from someone who polished the floors each day, silently observing the world around them. Her courage became a quiet legend within the company, a reminder that the unseen often hold the greatest power. And Rosa herself? She never forgot the fear she felt when she first spoke up, nor the trembling in her hands. It was a fear that led to change, a moment that proved that one voice, no matter how small, no matter how overlooked, could alter the course of events forever. Months passed, and the office atmosphere had changed entirely. Rosa Alvarez was no longer invisible. Her presence commanded attention, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. People listened when she spoke. Executives paused when she entered a room. Even the janitors and maintenance staff, who had once ignored her, now treated her with newfound respect. Alexander Grant continued to observe her quietly, often from his corner office. He marveled at how her instincts, sharpened by years of hardship, guided decisions that spreadsheets and lawyers alone could never foresee. Her influence was subtle but profound. The company avoided pitfalls that had once seemed inevitable, and the employees who had previously dismissed her learned a valuable lesson. Wisdom does not always wear a suit. One afternoon, a high-stakes meeting was scheduled. A new partnership deal was on the table, with hundreds of millions at stake. Lawyers and advisors filled the boardroom, each prepared to present their analyses. Rosa arrived early, adjusting her uniform, her cleaning cart pushed to the side. She wasn't supposed to speak. This wasn't her place, but she had learned that sometimes silence could be dangerous. As the meeting began, a representative from the prospective partner company presented the proposal. On the surface, it seemed flawless: impressive revenue projections, detailed plans, and polished presentations. But as Rosa listened, her instincts prickled. Something was off. The tone, the emphasis on small clauses, the subtle pressure tactics, it all rang familiar. Without thinking, she whispered to Alexander Grant, "Watch the clause on subsidiary ownership. They're trying to secure control quietly." His eyes met hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He asked a question to clarify, and soon, the subtle trap in the proposal became apparent. Lawyers had overlooked it, mesmerized by the surface-level allure. Thanks to Rosa's vigilance, Grant was able to renegotiate, safeguarding the company and preserving its independence. After the meeting, Alexander called Rosa to his office. He looked at her with the calm authority he was known for, but there was warmth there now, a recognition that went beyond professional courtesy. "You've become indispensable, Rosa," he said. "Not because of your title, not because of training, but because you see what others overlook and have the courage to act. That is rare." Rosa felt a blush rise to her cheeks. She had never sought recognition, never dreamed of accolades or status. Her only goal had been to protect what mattered, to act with honesty and integrity. And now, for the first time, she understood the true impact of her actions. Word of her insight continued to spread quietly. Employees, both high-ranking and low, began sharing the story. The cleaning lady who had prevented disaster, the woman whose whisper had stopped a millionaire from signing a dangerous contract. It became a symbol within the company, a lesson that no matter one's role, wisdom and courage could change the world. At home, Rosa's life remained grounded. She still cooked meals for her children, helped with homework, and managed the household with the same care she had always known. But she carried herself differently now, a quiet confidence born from the knowledge that her voice mattered. One evening, as she cleaned the office after everyone had gone, Alexander Grant appeared at the doorway. He looked out over the empty conference room, then turned to her. "Rosa," he said softly, "I've learned something from you. People like you, those who see clearly, act courageously, and speak when necessary, are rare. You remind me that power isn't just in wealth or titles. It's in integrity, honesty, and the courage to act when it counts." Rosa smiled faintly, feeling the weight of his words. She realized that her life, once defined by invisibility, had transformed into something meaningful beyond measure. One small whisper, born of intuition and bravery, had created ripples that would continue far beyond that room, far beyond her imagination. And so, Rosa continued her work, quietly, diligently, observing, learning, guiding when needed. The office was no longer the same, and neither was she. A single voice, once unnoticed, had changed the course of events, saved a company from disaster, and reminded everyone present that sometimes the smallest voice can echo the loudest. The story of Rosa Alvarez became more than an anecdote. It became a legend within the company. Visitors, employees, and executives alike would hear it told, always ending with the same lesson. Never underestimate the power of one voice, no matter how small, no matter how overlooked. Courage, integrity, and honesty, those were the true measures of influence. And in the quiet moments, when Rosa polished the floors and arranged papers, she remembered that day. The whisper that stopped a pen, the moment of disbelief, and the realization that even the unseen could shape destiny. That was the moment her life had changed, and in doing so, she had changed the lives of everyone around her.